A gute Woche, a guten Yutes Kislev, a guten Yontev. This afternoon, the Rebbe soll gesund sein, began with Farbrengen, that we are, today is Chai Kislev. And Chai Kislev comes after Toiv Kislev, which is Yudzayin Kislev, which was yesterday. And we also had this week the date of Tesvav Kislev, Kaima Sihara Bashli Musa. That is the day when the moon is at its completeness. And from today, we will be entering into Yutes Kislev. And Yutes Kislev, as we know, which is the Rosh Hashanah L'Chsidus, and for the Hanhogas Chassidus, for the customs of Chassidus as well. As it's known, the famous expression related from the Frierdiker Rebbe in behalf of his father, how Yutes Kislev is considered as a Rosh Hashanah L'Chsidus. And just like Rosh Hashanah has the concept of Imru Lefonai Malchios, Rebbe says that we should say the tefillas of Malchios, and that leads Shetamlichuni Aleichem, that we are appointing the Rebbe, that the Rebbe should be as our king, as our melech. The same is true regarding Pnimius HaTorah on Yutes Kislev, which is also a Rosh Hashanah, and here it's in the Pnimius HaNyonim, as it is tied with the concept of Afotas HaMayonos, spreading the well springs of Chassidus, and it should reach to Chutzah. Which actually, we all know that regarding Rosh Hashanah has in itself the fact that Rosh Hashanah is the Dinu Mishpat. The Rebbe judges us whatever we should receive throughout the entire year. And as the Rebbe always brings in behalf of the Hagoyes Maimene, which is a commentary on the Rambam, which is brought also in Lakut Torah in behalf of the Hagoyes Maimene, where he brings that the main Dinu Mishpat, Rosh Hashanah, is on Gashmias. On the Gashmias of a Yid, what we should get throughout the entire year, we go through a Dinu Mishpat on Rosh Hashanah. However, Chassidus explains, Ki choik li Yisrael hu, Mishpat lelekei Yankov, which this pasuk has a shaychus to Rosh Hashanah, that Rosh Hashanah not only is there a dinu mishpat on the gashmis of each and every yid, but there is also a dinu mishpat on Rosh Hashanah, mishpat lelekei Yaakov, how much a likus should be revealed in the world through every yid. That's also part of the dinu mishpat of Rosh Hashanah, and that's the whole thing in Chassidus stresses at length. That Rosh Hashanah we accept the Rebbe as our Melech, and that's the whole meaning of Binyan Malchus is on Rosh Hashanah. This all relates one to another. Why? Because the whole uftu of Rosh Hashanah is how we are realizing how the Rebbe is in control of the entire world. Was meant us? To bring a lekus into the world. Or, as it is yet more stressed, Rosh Hashanah is not the day of creation. Rosh Hashanah is the day that Adam Rishon was created. And here we imply the pasuk that Adam Rishon said, Boyu nishtachade v'nichra lifnei Hashem eseinu. What did Adam Rishon institute into the world right away? He instituted the concept how we should all go and realize that there is Hashem eseinu, the Rebbe, the one that made us, our master, our creator, and boyu nishtachad v'nichal, let us all go and bow l'fnei Hashem Elokeinu eseinu, l'fnei Hashem eseinu, the Rebbe who has created us. So basically what it all boils down to is that the concept of Rosh Hashanah is to reveal a lakus into the world, and how much a lakus should be felt in the world, and so forth. When we're talking about Yutes Kislev, and Yutes Kislev relates to Afotas HaMayonos, it's the same concept. What's the inyan of Afotas HaMayonos? What's the inyan of Chassidus? Chassidus brings out the Eibishter. How do we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What gives us an understanding in Getlichkeit? What gives us an understanding in Elokus? That is by learning Chassidus. Here we say, what did Yutes Kislev accomplish? Yutes Kislev accomplished Afotas HaMayonos. That an inyan which relates to spreading the concept of godliness should come out in a force without any halomis v'esteirim. Actually, Rebbe didn't elaborate that much, but let us understand a minute. What's the time the Alter Rebbe was in prison? The Rebbe was in prison from the day after Sukkot till Yutes Kislev. We all know that it totals 53 days. And it's brought out that why was the Alter Rebbe in prison for 53 days? Because this corresponds to the 53 Prokim of Tanya which the Alter Rebbe wrote. It's not something, just a coincidence, that it 53 days relate to 53 Prokim. There's much more to it. What does it mean? Prior to Yutes Kislev, there was a Helem v'Hester in Chassidus. And the Helem v'Hester was Lamata because it was Lamayla. Gashmias is a result of Ruchnias. And that is why the Alter Rebbe had to go through 53 days of prison, because there was a Helem v'Hester Milamayla on the 53 Prokim which the Alter Rebbe wrote in Tanya. And after the Alter Rebbe went through this arrest, and when it came to the liberation of the Alter Rebbe, when it came to Yutes Kislev, this is when this Helem v'Hester Chassidus was removed. The Mela, when the Helem v'Hester of Chassidus was removed, this is when Afotzas Hamayonis began with a strong flow, with a force. There's a famous expression from the Rebbe Rashab, which is mentioned many, many times, very often in Siches, that Afotzas Hamayonis began after Peterburg. Was made after Peterburg, after Petersburg, after the Alter Rebbe came out of prison, after the liberation of the Alter Rebbe, after Yutes Kislev. That is when Hafotzas Hamayonis began. In fact, if I remember correctly, it's mentioned in the Chassidus that even the length of the Mamorim, prior to Yutes Kislev, the Alter Rebbe would say brief Teiras, very short Teiras, and it was after Yutes Kislev that the Alter Rebbe began to say longer Mamorim. And here there's a famous expression which is also implied from the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab expressed himself just like an olive. When the olive is crushed, that is when we get the oil out of the olive. The same way, he says, the Alter Rebbe had to go through a crushing, and that is the period that the Alter Rebbe was in Tfisa. And after going through the crushing, that is when the flow of oil begins. And as we all know, that Chassidus, which is Pnimius HaTorah, is compared to oil, is compared to Shemen. Torah Bechlal is compared to food, and in food itself there are various different kinds of foods. And when we're talking about Pnimius HaTorah is compared to Shemen. Reason is given for this also. Shemen has this advantage that when you'll have a glass of any type of fluid, and when you will put 2 drops of Shemen into the glass, the Shemen will be noticeable, the Shemen will be outstanding. The same is the effect of Chassidus. Chassidus is outstanding when it gets into a person, it remains outstanding, the effect that Chassidus has on a person. Or as it's explained furthermore, that when we take a meichel, any dish, and we put oil into the dish, the oil permeates into the entire meichel. And the same we say is regard to the shemen, the pnimius of Torah. The pnimius of Torah also penetrates into the entire person. But regardless, getting back to our Inyan, the flow of Afotzas Hamayonis, when did it begin? All of this began after Peterburg. And Afotzas Hamayonis, actually, this is the same concept as Rosh Hashanah Shetamlichuni Alech. To reveal godliness in the world, to instill and to spread the concept of Elokus into this world. It's customary that every Inyan we relate to Pashas HaShavua. And at times, not only to Pashas HaShavua, but to the entire Chumash which we are into. And the Chumash which we are into now is Sefer Bereshis. And Sefer Bereshis has another name. It is called Sefer HaYosher. And the reason for it is given in Chazal, because it discusses the Yeshorim, the righteous ones, the others. The truth is that every Yid, Amech Kulam Tzadikim, so every Yid is considered a Yosher, a Yeshorim, righteous one. So every Yid has a shayches to whatever is discussed in Chumash Bereshis, especially in light of what Chazal tell us, Mainsei Avos is Simen Laban. And here the Rebbe brought out, stressed in the entire first Sikha, brought it out once and then emphasizing it again, adding more details. Seder HaAveda, how each Sedra relates one to another in Chumash Bereshis. We start off with Pashas Bereshis. What is the inyan of Bereshis? Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. that a Yid has to know, first and foremost, that everything which we have in this world was created by the Eibishter. This is the first thing which we have to have in mind, and the first thing which we have to realize, how everything here was created by Hashem. And furthermore, that Bereishis, Beis Reishis, there are two Reishis, Bishvil HaTorah u Bishvil Yisrael. Why did the Eibishter create this world? He created this world because of Torah and because of Yidden, and that all of these two, actually all of these three, should be united. Yisrael, Araisa, V'Kutshe Brichu, Kulchu Chad. Yidden, Torah, and the Eibishter are all one. They are all united together. How? When one unites with the other. So that is when they're all together. So this brings out the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create the world. What was the famous expression of Chassidus? Nisada HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter had a temptation, liyos lo yizbarech, that he should have dira betachtonim, a dwelling place, a place of residence betachtonim here in this world, and this should be in a way of noyach. What's the pshat noyach? Noyach is meloshin naicha, meloshin pleasant. The Eibishter wanted this, that this should bring to him a pleasantness, the fact that he created the world. How does this happen? By Lech Lecha, by the Neshama coming down into this world, and the Neshama fulfilling the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Neshama gets strength to come down in this world. As we all know, the beginning of Tanya, what Alter Rebbe brings, famous Chazal, Mashbiya Noisei, that a Neshama goes under oath, that the Neshama should be a tzaddik, and not the opposite. So we all know the famous taich that Mashbiyan is not only Meloshin Shvua, but Mashbiyan is also Meloshin Soiva, Meloshin being filled up. Before a Neshama comes down, before a Neshama goes into this Lech Lecha, the Neshama is being filled up with koiches to be able to fulfill this mission. And again, a double expression, Lech Lecha. It's not satisfactory. One step, we constantly have to be a mahalech, constantly to keep on going, Lech Lecha. And when the Yid goes through this Lech Lecha, then he comes to a higher madrega, to a madrega of Vayera, that he's fortunate to see the Eibishter, Vayera Elav Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes himself seen to the Yid who's fulfilling this mission. And the Yid does it in a way, as the Torah continues, how long did Sarah live? Sarah lived for 127 years. Explain the Chassidus at length. What's the inyan of Meya Shana, Esrim Shanim, and Sheva Shanim? So Chassidus explains at length that Meya Shana relates to the Rotzen of a person, and Esrim and Sheva, this relates to Moichin and to Midas. Sheva is simple. Sheva is the inyan of Midas. There's 7 midas in a person. Let's see, this is explained the shaykhis, why Meya has a shaykhis to Rotzen, and why Esrim has a shaykhis to Meichen. But regardless, it emphasizes that all the person has, his desire and his intellect and his emotion, everything is dedicated to the cause. The cause why the Neshama was sent down into this world. And then, when this is fulfilled, then we come to the level of Toldos. What is Tilda Seyin Shel Tzadikim? What is considered Tilda Seyin Shel Tzadikim? Chazal tell us Maisim Tovim. In other words, becomes fruit-bearing. There are fruit-bearing results from the Avodah, and the results are so fruit-bearing that they remain for eternally. And yet more, here the Rebbe brings, what does Rashi tell us at the beginning of Toldos? The beginning of Toldos, Rashi says, who are the Toldos of Yitzchak? Yaakov ve'Esav ha'amurim beparsha. Is it a touch? Yaakov ve'Esav ha'amurim beparsha. We know there's a Yaakov and there's an Esav. What's the pshat of Yaakov and Esav that we're told about in Chumash? What are they? A different Yaakov and Esav. So the truth is, Chassidus explains that in Esav there are various levels. There's the Esav, the way we see an Esav in the street. Then there is the Shoirish of Esav, the source of Esav, the way it is Lamaila, and the source of Esav, the way it is Lamaila. That is the Esav ha'omor beparsha, the Esav state in Torah. And that is what we find, that when Yaakov, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, and Yaakov was ready to meet Esav, Yaakov thought that Esav was already, at that time, he was no longer the Esav of the street. Yaakov thought that Esav purified himself to come up to his original source. It's explained in Chassidus that Esav and Yaakov, their source are from Toihu and from Tikkun. Yaakov thought at that time that Esav was already at his original Ruchnius de Kasros, meaning that Esav was ready for the coming of Mashiach, that all the Birurim, all the sparks of Kedusha were already uplifted from him, and he is already ready for the end of the Avodah. The truth is, it wasn't so yet. But what do we say is the Avodah Vayid? The Avodah Vayid is Yaakov, the Esav, but what Esav? To be mevarer Esav, to uplift Esav and elevate the sparks of Kedusha, that it should come to the Esav Amo B'Parsha. The Esav steht in Torah. From Pashas Toldos we go to Pashas Vayetze. Here again we emphasize Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva, how the neshama is going out with all its 7 midos, Beersheva, and Vayelach Charana, and reaching out into an area even which is called Charon. Charon is the Taich Meloshna anger. It's causing anger. Charon af shaloila. In other words, how the neshama is coming down into this world, and the neshama permeates into the entire Seder Shtalshalos. And all this is not enough. Because here we emphasize how the person is doing all of this Avodah himself. Here we come weiter to Vayishlach. What is Vayishlach? Not only being satisfied of doing the Avodah oneself, but he's sending Shluchim to do the Avodah. This reminds us on the attitude of the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who sent Shluchim all over into the furthest islands. And the Frierdiker Rebbe himself also arrived in a Shlichus here in this part of the globe. The Rebbe refers to it, the Chatzi Kader HaTachtain, to fulfill his mission here. And all of this is an inyan of Shlichos, and from here he sent Shluchim and sent the Shluchim all over, to all parts of the world, to the furthest islands of the world. And this entire Avodah comes in an oifen from Vayeshev. Vayeshev stresses the concept of Hisyashvus. It's all becomes settled. It becomes permanent. What is the inyan of Yeshiva? When one sits, it's an expression of permanency. The same, all this Avodah becomes in a permanent way, in a constant way, in an ongoing fashion. It's not like on a temporary basis or so. It's in a hisyashvus. And when the Avodah is done in such a way, what does it lead to? It leads to miketz. What is miketz? Miketz means it comes to an end. It leads to the end of Golus. And then what happens is vayigash. We get close. We get close to whom? We get close to the Eibishter. And once there are no interferences between the Yid and the Eibishter, and we become totally united, and then we come to the ultimate level of Vayechi, which is a completely different life, a permanent life, a permanent and eternal life, which this will be once Mashiach will come. Here in the Sikha, the Rebbe again stressed the importance of Yutas Kislev and accepting proper hachlotas on Yutas Kislev, and that these hachlotas should all be brought down into a Poel Mamesh. Rabbi even mentioned we know the custom of Chassidim that on Erev Yutas Kislev to Mincha we already do not recite Tachnun because it's treated like an Erev Yontev, and we make Farbrengen in Yutas Kislev, side the first night of Yutas Kislev as well as the second night of Yutas Kislev. Rabbi says it's known that the minig of Rabbi Seinu Nisienu was the Rabbeim had a minig that their Farbrengen would usually be on the second night of Yutas Kislev. On the night of Yutas Kislev, from Yutas to Chav, could be that the reason for it is the Rebbe, because when was the final redemption of the Alter Rebbe? When was he finally free? It wasn't till very late, till the night from Yutas into Chav. There's a famous story that I'll refer to it briefly today, that when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, it seems like the government then knew of a certain location of a certain house where the Alter Rebbe's chassid lived, and they wanted to take him to the house of the chassid. But in the same building where the chassid lived, the misnagid also lived. So when they brought the Alter Rebbe to this house, it seems not knowing which apartment was occupied by the chassid and which one was occupied by the misnagid, so they knocked on the door of the misnagid, and the misnagid immediately realized that he has the Alter Rebbe in front of him, and he took the Alter Rebbe into his house. The way the story goes, he totally disrespected the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe had a very hard time. He harassed him with questions and in a very unpolite and a very unrespectful way. Until finally later, Chassidim knew that Alter Rebbe was released. Chassidim began looking all over Peterburg, what's happening. So somehow they had a clue that Alter Rebbe was in the building and he was upstairs. Chassidim came, Chassidim took Alter Rebbe out. In fact, where the story goes that Alter Rebbe expressed himself that a couple of hours that he spent in the house of the Misnagid were much harder and much worse than all the 53 days which he spent in prison. So actually what we get out of this is, what do we see? Factually, that when was the final release, the full and complete release of the Alter Rebbe? That didn't happen until at night, until the night of Chav. So could be, says the Rebbe, that this is the reason why Rabbi Seinu Nesienu, their Farbrengens, they would be making from the night of Yutes entering into Chav. But regardless, Farbrengen should be made, and side the first night and side the second night, as well as during the day, and to utilize this day properly for proper achlotas, proper decisions. So the Rebbe expressed himself towards the end of the Farbrengen that we should make Farbrengens for everybody, for Anoshim, Noshim, V'taf, for men, women, and children. And just like in the Beis HaMikdash, when celebrations were made for men, women, and children, it was done in the proper way, in its tzniusdik way, men separate and women separate and so forth. The same way should be made now as well. Actually, the whole Farbrengen really had one long sicha, which we just went through, and then there was a brief sicha which the Rebbe called for those that have submitted mashke, should come up and get the mashke and announce for what occasion it is. The Rebbe also mentioned that there is an occasion which is involving him, which relates to him, and that is regarding the library of Agudas Chasidei Chabad, that beginning to build a library for Agudas Chasidei Chabad here on these premises, in other words, on the premises of 770. And the Rebbe again brought to attention that mashke that is taken for affairs which take place during the week, of course of halacha being that we do it on Shabbos, to make sure that we begin distributing the mashke here on Shabbos during the Shabbos Farbrengen. And again, that everybody should look up to those who are doing these affairs. Rabbi used the expression "Mimenu yiru v'chein yasu," to see what they are doing and then to follow in their footsteps, to also do similar affairs of celebrations that relate to Chassidische Farbrengens and so forth. A gute Woche and a guten Yontif.
How Freilich Farbrengen was never stood up.
After those that submitted the mashke, the Rebbe gave mashke to everybody. Then the Rebbe began to sing the nigun, famous nigun, which the Rebbe begins, which we know as the Rebbe's father's nigun. And right thereafter, the Rebbe stood up and the Rebbe began to dance, and in an extremely joyful way. A gute Woche. The Rebbe also mentioned that there are guests here at the Farbrengen, and we have to treat the guests properly. Therefore, they should all say L'chaim. They should all join in by saying L'chaim, and they should all sing a nigun. And the Rebbe said that they should all sing together the nigun of Ufaratzta. I'm not going to be able to give you an exact quote on that. There's an Alter Yid, Rabbi Yosef Nemoitin, This Rabbi Yosef Nemoitin lived for many, many years in Alma Ata. That is where the Rebbe's father passed away. He himself was in Alma Ata. He lived there for many years, and he helped the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's mother. After the Rebbe's father passed away, he was very close to the family. He was helped out a lot to the Rebbe's father as well. And then later he helped the Rebbe's mother leave Russia and so forth. And he himself remained for many, many years living in Alma Ata, and taking full charge of the tzion of the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Vayishlach. And the Rebbe shows a lot of warmth to this Rabbi Yosef, a lot of recognition and appreciation for taking care of his parents and taking care of the tzion and so forth. And it was in the Farbrengen the Rebbe looked to Rabbi Yosef and he gave him a very warm smile. So Rabbi Yosef got up and he goes over to the Rebbe. First of all, he makes a shechayanu, maybe because it's Yitas Kislev, I don't know. Erev Yitas Kislev.
Which Shem Malchus?
Yeah. And then he tells the Rebbe, that next year we should all be able to celebrate in Yerushalayim. And then he starts saying, he says to the Rebbe that the Rebbe's Chassidim, the Rebbe's children, have asked him to ask the Rebbe that the Rebbe should Farbrengen Yitas Kislev. And some of the Rebbe's Chassidim, some of the Rebbe's children, asked that the Rebbe should say a Maimah on Yitas Kislev. So he says, but I told them, this is what Rabbi Yosef says, but I told them that the Rebbe knows what he's doing. What is he saying loud? The Rebbe listened to him, and then the Rebbe says, and he's kind of waiting for an answer. So the Rebbe told him, well, you already told them the right answer. So the Rebbe gave him a piece of cake, so he asked the Rebbe for another piece of cake. And then another, and then for a third, and then the Rebbe gave him a third piece of cake, right? Okay, a good Yontif. He used expressions that he has done, as Rabbi Yosef did, what really the Rebbe himself was supposed to do, that it was to take care of his parents. And Rabbi Yosef did it, so he's extremely indebted to him. The Rebbe said these words publicly about him.